not the soft white of lace and winter sun through chapel glass. This was a brutal, searing glare that swallowed breath and thought and dignity in one bite. Ysmera's knees hit the stone dais. Her fingers clawed at the edge of the altar cloth, tearing embroidered moons into threads. Behind her, the packed hall roared like a sea that had smelled blood. The stake was simple and immediate. If the brand took, she would be cast out before the last wedding candle guttered, sent into the snow with no pack scent on her, no protection, no name anyone was allowed to answer. Smoke curled from the metal in the elder's gloved hands. It carried the sharp stink of burned herbs, juniper and bitterroot, meant to purify a liar, a barren Omega, a mistake. Ysmera's throat worked soundlessly. She had been trained not to scream in public. Omegas were taught 1,000 graceful ways to be small. But pain didn't care about training. A sound ripped loose anyway, raw and humiliating, and the hall answered with hungry silence. The elder lifted the iron. The mark on its face was a sigil every child knew before they learned their letters, a broken circle bisected by a barbed line. Forsworn. The elder's voice echoed against the chapel's cold marble. By pack law, by altar law, by the moon's witness. No, Ysmera thought wildly. Not the moon. Not in front of her. She turned her head, desperate, searching the dais for the only person who could stop this. The man meant to be her husband stood a pace away, immaculate in ceremonial black, silver thread running down his sleeves like frost. His scent, spiced cedar and sharp authority, had once made her heart flutter in obedient relief. Edrian Cerwyn didn't move. His eyes were the color of winter rivers that never thawed. He looked at her as if she were already a cautionary tale carved into stone. The elder's hand hovered. Alpha Edrian Cerwyn, do you accept this Omega under your protection, your bond, your bloodline? A pause. The entire hall leaned into it. All those alphas and betas, all those perfumed Omegas behind fans and veils, everyone tasting scandal like sweet wine. Edrian's jaw flexed once. Then his voice cut clean through the incense and whispers. I refuse. The word struck harder than the iron. Ysmera's lungs forgot how to work. Her mind tried to catch up, sliding and failing like a foot on ice. Refuse? But the ceremony had begun. Her wrists still bore the red ribbon. The altar still held the shared cup. The moon's chant had already been sung. The elder's brow lifted, almost relieved. State your cause. Edrian stepped forward just enough that the crowd could drink his expression. He didn't look down at her. He looked past her, toward the banners of the pack, toward the carved wolves on the chapel walls, toward the lineage records sealed in glass. She is barren, he said, each syllable placed like a nail. The healers confirmed it. An Omega who cannot carry is a broken vessel. I will not bind my line to uselessness. The word uselessness made a ripple, an audible shiver, as if dozens of throats swallowed at once. Ysmera tasted metal. She hadn't bitten her tongue, but it felt like she had. Her gaze snapped back to him, disbelieving, pleading without intending to. You said, he finally looked down, there was no softness waiting. I said what was needed to secure peace between packs. That peace no longer requires you. Something moved in the corner of Ysmera's vision. Her mother, pale as snow, swaying in the front row with hands knotted in her lap. 2 guards stood behind her, not gently. Pack law in action, Ysmera realized with nauseating clarity. The moment an Omega was declared forsworn, her family was made to sit still and watch because any protest was treason. Any outburst meant the stain spread. Her father didn't look up at all. His shoulders were bowed like a man already carrying a coffin. The elder lowered the iron again. Then the right is severed. The Omega Ysmera of my name, Ysmera rasped. It scraped out of her like a stone. She hated the way the sound shook. "My name is Ysmera Sableheart." A laugh, quiet and delighted, traveled through the pews. Sableheart, an old line once respected. Not powerful enough to refuse a Carowin, not helpless enough to be pitied. The elder didn't flinch. "Ysmera Sableheart is marked Forsworn. She is cut from the pack scent. She is denied shelter, food, kinship, and protection. Any who aid her share her punishment." The iron pressed down. Pain flooded so fast it felt like drowning. Ysmera's vision fractured into colors. The chapel's stained glass, the white petals scattered at her feet, the dark hem of Edrian's cloak. The sigil burned into her collarbone, just above the heart, so it would show whenever she breathed. She bit her cheek hard enough to taste blood and forced herself not to beg. The pack would feast on begging. When the iron lifted, her skin throbbed as if something had taken root and started to grow. The mark wasn't only a wound. It was a declaration written in scent as much as flesh. She could already feel it leaking from her bitter, ruined, unwanted. The elder stepped back. "Remove her." Hands caught her arms, not cruel, not gentle, efficient. Ysmera's feet dragged across stone, her veil snagged and tore. Someone's nails dug into her wrist hard enough to bruise. She tried to twist, to look once more at Edrian, to find some crack in this nightmare. Some indication that this was a punishment to be reversed if she proved herself. If he wasn't watching anymore. He had turned to the crowd, already wearing the face of a noble alpha who had made a difficult choice for the good of all. The women who'd envied her leaned forward now, hungry for details. The men nodded solemnly, pleased to see law upheld without sentiment. Ysmera's breath came in ragged bursts. The chapel doors yawned open. Cold air slammed into her, the winter outside eager as a predator. She stumbled over the threshold and the world hit her full in the face. A gray sky heavy with snow, a courtyard glazed with ice, the distant black line of forest. The guards didn't bother with a cloak. No shoes beyond her thin ceremonial slippers. No food, no coin. Pack law again. She was not meant to survive long enough to become a problem. The gates creaked as they swung wider. Beyond them, the road curved away, already swallowed by drifting snow. A final shove sent her stumbling onto the road. The gate slammed. The sound was so final it felt like the end of a life. Ysmera stood for one swaying second, her hands pressed to the fresh brand as if she could smother it into nothing. Her breath fogged. Tears tried to rise, but cold stole them before they could fall. From the far side of the gate, Edrian's voice carried, muffled but distinct enough to slice. Let the record show the moon's mercy was offered. She refused truth. Truth. Ysmera turned her head toward the forest. The trees stood like a wall of spears. Wind threaded through them with a hiss that sounded like warning. She started walking anyway, because standing still was how people froze. The first hour wasn't dramatic. It was simply cold, and then colder, until her bones felt made of glass. The road vanished under fresh snow. Ysmera's slippers soaked through and became little prisons of ice around her feet. Every step sent needles of pain up her calves. The brand on her collarbone pulsed with heat that fought the cold in a cruel, exhausting tug-of-war. Pack scent faded from her hair, from her skin, as if it had been scrubbed away with lye. Wolves recognized wolves by scent as much as sight. Without it, she was prey in a world that didn't like outsiders. She tried to stay oriented by the wind. The forest lay north, the river east. If she could reach the old logging cabins near the river, she could hide until morning. If she could hide until morning, she could think. If she could think, she could. A sharp cramp seized her stomach. She doubled over, gagging into her hands. Nothing came up. She'd eaten only ceremonial fruit since dawn. Baron Edrian had said, the healer had said. Ysmera squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe. She remembered the healer's cool hands on her belly, the herbs under her tongue, the way the healer's gaze slid away when Ysmera asked what was wrong. She had believed them. Of course she had. Omegas were taught to believe authority because authority was supposed to keep them safe. Her pulse hammered. She straightened, trembling, and kept moving. Snow began to fall in earnest, thick and heavy, muffling sound. The world narrowed to the crunch of her steps and the ache in her lungs. Her hair, dressed in wedding pins, came loose in damp strands that stuck to her cheeks. Somewhere behind her, in the direction of the packlands, a wolf howled, long, distant, not a call of comfort, but a boundary being reinforced. You are not ours. Ysmera left the road and entered the trees. The forest swallowed her like a mouth closing. By dusk, she had lost feeling in 3 fingers and most of her toes. Her mind started playing tricks, lights that weren't there, soft voices that turned out to be wind, a shape between trees that became a stump when she blinked. Hunger gnawed, but cold was stronger. Cold made everything else feel pointless, like a story told to someone already dead. She found the river by accident, heard it before she saw it, a low, relentless rush under ice. The bank was steep and slick. She slid down on her backside, tearing her dress, and sat there for a moment, staring at the dark water as if it could answer her. If she followed the river, she might reach the cabins. If she didn't, she would die here, and her body would be found in spring, and the pack would nod solemnly and call it fate. Ysmera forced herself up again. Her legs shook so hard she nearly fell. She took one step, then another, moving along the river's edge. The forest changed as the light bled out. Shadows deepened, trunks became columns, the spaces between them turned into doors leading to places her eyes couldn't follow. Her instincts screamed that she was being watched. She tried to steady herself by naming what she could see: birch bark flaking like paper, pine needles dark as ink, snow piling in soft drifts, her breath, her hands. A twig snapped somewhere behind her. She froze. The snap was too deliberate for wind. Too close. Her scent, ruined, forsworn, would carry differently now, sharp and noticeable like a wound. If there were wolves out here, they'd smell weakness and lawlessness in one breath. Another sound, the slow crunch of something heavy moving through snow. Ysmera's heart kicked. She turned back to the river and grabbed a fallen branch. It was wet and half-rotted, but it was something. A shape shifted between the trees. Not a deer, not a bear. Wolf. Massive, dark, almost blending with shadow except for the pale glint of eyes. It stepped forward without haste, as if it already knew she couldn't run. Ysmera lifted the branch, arms shaking. Stay back. The wolf's head tilted. Its ears flicked forward, catching her voice. Then another shape moved, this one to the right, lighter, smaller, and then another. A small pack, drawn by chance or by the smell of a lone Omega with no pack's protection. Ysmera's throat tightened. Wolves weren't supposed to hunt people. Pack law forbade it. But she wasn't pack now, was she? That was the point of Forsworn. Out here, she was meat that walked upright. The first wolf took a step closer. Its lips lifted slightly, showing teeth. Ysmera's knees threatened to give out. She backed up until her heels met ice at the river's edge. The water hissed under its skin of frozen gray. "Please," she whispered, then hated herself for it and tried again with something sharper. "Go, a growl cut her off. Not from the wolves in front of her. From behind. It rolled through the trees like thunder contained in a throat. The air seemed to vibrate with it. The wolves froze, their bodies going rigid, heads snapping toward the source. Something moved in the darkness, low, fast, impossibly silent for its size. A body slammed into the closest wolf with brutal force. Snow exploded. There was a yelp, strangled short. Ysmera stumbled back, shock stealing the little coordination she had left. The newcomer was a wolf too, but larger than any she'd seen outside of stories. His coat was a dark slate, streaked with white scars that caught faint light like old lightning. One ear was torn. His muzzle bore a jagged line where teeth had once sunk deep. He didn't posture. He didn't bark warnings. He attacked like a verdict. The smaller wolves scattered, not in a disorganized panic, but in a sudden, instinctive retreat, as if every nerve in their bodies recognized an apex threat and obeyed without question. One tried to stand its ground. The scarred wolf snapped his jaws inches from its throat, and the sound alone, bone-deep, absolute, sent it scrambling. Within seconds, the forest was empty except for Ysmera, the river, and the scarred wolf. He stood between her and where the others had been, chest rising and falling slow, steam curling from his mouth. Blood flecked his fur. His eyes were not the bright gold she expected from pack alphas, but a darker amber, like fire seen through smoke. Ysmera's fingers had locked around the branch so tightly her knuckles ached. She didn't lower it. She couldn't. The wolf turned his head slightly, looking back at her over his shoulder. A low sound rumbled from him, questioning, not threatening. Her vision blurred. Cold and fear had wrung her out until there was nothing left to hold her upright. She tried to speak, to explain herself like explanations mattered to beasts and winter, but her teeth chattered hard enough to bite her tongue. The world tilted. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was that scarred wolf stepping toward her. Not hurried, not panicked, as if he had all the time in the world to decide whether she lived. Warmth returned in fragments. First, the ache of thawing skin, painful, prickling, like thousands of needles waking. Then the scent of smoke, not ceremonial and bitter, but wood smoke layered with something darker beneath it, something like resin and iron. Ysmera's eyes fluttered open. She was on a bed of furs in a small cabin. The ceiling was low, made of rough beams. A fire burned in a stone hearth, its light moving across walls hung with dried herbs and strips of leather. Snow tapped softly against a shuttered window. Her dress had been removed. Panic hit like a slap, but she realized instantly she wasn't naked. Someone had wrapped her in a thick shirt that smelled faintly of wolf and pine, and a blanket heavy enough to anchor her to the bed. Her burned collarbone was uncovered, though, the Forsworn mark angry and red. She pushed herself up on shaking arms. Her body felt bruised all over, as if cold had beaten her. A shadow shifted near the hearth. A man rose from a crouch, and for a heartbeat Ysmera's mind refused to accept the translation between wolf and human. The size was the same, the presence larger than the room could hold. He straightened to his full height, towering, broad-shouldered, built like something meant for war rather than ceremony. His skin was marked with scars like pale rivers. One ran from his collarbone down across his chest, disappearing beneath trousers. Another cut across his forearm, puckered and thick. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, untamed. His eyes, those same smoky amber, held no softness, but not cruelty either. He didn't speak. Ysmera's pulse stuttered. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, the movement instinctive. "Who are you?" The man's gaze dropped briefly to the brand on her collarbone. Something sharp flickered in his expression, anger, perhaps, or recognition. He looked away again, jaw tight, and moved to a shelf. He set a cup on the edge of the bed within her reach. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of broth and herbs. Food. Her stomach clenched painfully at the smell. She hated that her body reacted so quickly, betraying her pride. "Did you bring me here?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse. He nodded once. "Why?" A pause. He seemed to weigh the question like a stone in his palm. Then he spoke, voice low, rough with disuse. "You were freezing." The words landed simply, without flourish, which made them more unsettling than any practiced reassurance. No claim. No demand. No lecture about what an Omega owed for rescue. Ysmera's throat tightened anyway. You're alone out here." He didn't answer immediately. He went back to the hearth, adjusted a pot, then turned again. His movements were controlled, economical, predator precision without threat, an unnerving combination. Finally he said, yes, a lonely answer. An entire life condensed. Ysmera looked around. There were no signs of other people, no extra bed, no feminine touches. Only tools, furs, knives, herbs, and a heavy coat hanging by the door. Survival, not comfort. She reached for the cup with stiff fingers. The broth was hot enough to burn her tongue if she wasn't careful. She sipped anyway, greedily, because warmth was a kind of mercy, and she hadn't had much of it today. It soothed her throat. It woke her stomach like a bell. The man watched her drink without expression. You're not from my pack." It was a statement more than a question. His scent was wrong for packlands, wild, unclaimed, threaded with something old. Not the polished dominance of a court alpha. Something feral and quiet. He shook his head. Ysmera's eyes lowered to her own collarbone again. The mark throbbed, pulsing with remembered heat. "They branded me." His gaze followed hers. His hands curled into fists at his sides. For the first time, she saw a flash of something raw in him, rage held tight enough to cut. "Forsworn," he said, tasting the word like ash. "Yes." Silence thickened the cabin. Outside, wind worried at the roof. Somewhere far off, a wolf called, answered by nothing. Ysmera drew a slow breath, trying to force her mind into order. "If they find you helped me," he gave a single, humorless exhale. "Let them." There was no bravado in it, only certainty. The certainty frightened her more than threats. "You don't understand," she said, the words tumbling out because fear needed somewhere to go. "Pack law forbids aiding me. They will punish you." She swallowed. "They'll kill you." He looked at her for a long moment. Something unreadable passed behind his eyes like a memory crossing a distant ridge. "They already tried," he said. Ysmera's breath caught. The cabin seemed to tilt around that sentence. The scars on his skin shifted in the firelight, suddenly less like random wounds and more like history written into flesh. "Who are you?" she asked again, softer this time, because she could feel the danger in the answer. He didn't reply. Instead, he crossed the room and crouched near the bed, close enough that Ysmera could feel his heat, close enough that her Omega instincts rose like startled birds. Fear, yes, but also something else, something humiliatingly physical. The presence of a powerful alpha did things to an Omega's body, even when the Omega's mind wanted distance. Ysmera clenched her jaw and forced her gaze to stay steady. His eyes flicked briefly to her throat, then to the brand, then away. He held out a small jar, salve, dark and glossy. "Put this on," he said. Ysmera hesitated. "Why? Fever," he answered. "If the burn festers, you won't last." No tenderness, no coaxing, just a blunt statement of fact. She took the jar with numb fingers. The salve smelled of comfrey and something sharper, wolfbane maybe, or ironroot. Remedies for pain and infection. Things a lone man shouldn't have unless he knew how to use them. He shifted as if to rise. "Wait." The word came out before Ysmera could stop it. She hated how small it sounded. She tried again, more controlled. I need to know what you want from me." His gaze settled on her, heavy and steady. "Nothing." That was impossible. Everything had a price, especially protection. Ysmera's lips parted, searching for the next question, the one that would make the world make sense again. Instead, she blurted, "What should I call you?" A pause. Stood, slow and careful, as if sudden movement might spook her. "Severin." The name hit her like a cold hand closing around her spine. It was a name from songs half-whispered in pack nurseries when adults thought children were asleep. A name from royal histories carved into stone. Severin Nocturne, the ghost Alpha. He was supposed to be dead. Ysmera's mouth went dry. That's not possible. Severin's expression didn't change, but the air around him felt like a storm held back by will alone. It is. The cabin's fire crackled. Shadows danced like watchers on the walls. Ysmera's mind raced, trying to assemble fragments. House Nocturne had ruled the Highlands before the council, before the packs carved the territory into treaties. The heir had vanished after a blood feud, the story ending in an ambush and a burned carriage. Everyone knew that tale. Everyone knew the lesson. Even alphas die when their own turn. "You're alive," Ysmera whispered. Severin's eyes didn't soften. "Barely, for a long time." "And you're hiding here." "I'm not hiding." The words were quiet, but they carried weight. "I'm waiting." Waiting for what? Retribution? The right moment? Death? Ysmera's hand tightened around the salve jar until it hurt. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, an absurd, dangerous thread of hope. If a dead alpha could live, perhaps a barren omega could be something other than useless. A sharp knock against the cabin door shattered the thought. Not a polite knock. Not human, a heavy impact like a fist or a boot testing the wood. Severin's entire posture changed in a heartbeat. He moved without sound, crossing to the door, one hand lifting to the latch, the other going to a knife on the wall. His head tilted, listening. Another impact. The wood shuddered. Ysmera's pulse spiked. She pushed the blanket aside and slid her feet to the floor, wincing at the pain in her toes. Her legs nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stand, grasping the bed frame for balance. Severin glanced back at her once, a flash of command in his eyes. "Stay." "I can't," Ysmera started, but the door struck again, harder, and her voice died. A voice carried through the wood, muffled but recognizable in cadence even without clear words. Alpha, pack-trained, used to being obeyed. Severin's jaw tightened. His gaze sharpened, focusing on sound the way a blade focused on a throat. Ysmera's blood chilled. She knew that voice. It couldn't be, not this fast, not in a storm, not with the forest between another hit. The latch trembled. Edrian, he had come after her. Not with remorse, not with mercy, with purpose. Ysmera's hand drifted to her branded collarbone as if to shield it. Her pulse hammered against the broken circle burned there. She could almost feel the packlaw trying to drag her back by the mark like a chain. Severin leaned close to the door, listening. His nostrils flared once, catching scent through the cracks. His expression turned colder than the snow outside. "They brought trackers," he murmured. A third impact split the lower hinge. The door sagged, still holding, but only just. Ysmera's breath came fast. "He'll kill you." Severin didn't look away from the door. Let him try. The words should have comforted her. Instead, they filled the cabin with the promise of violence, immediate and unstoppable. The latch finally gave. The door burst inward in a spray of snow and splintered wood, letting winter roar into the room like a living thing. A figure stood in the threshold, framed by stormlight and drifting white. Broad shoulders under a dark cloak, a silver clasp at the throat. Familiar scent, cedar, authority, the pack's polished dominance. Edrian's eyes found Ysmera instantly, and something like satisfaction flickered there, quick and ugly. Then his gaze slid to Severin. For a fraction of a second, Edrian's face betrayed him shock, then calculation, then a slow, dangerous smile. "Well," he said, voice carrying over the wind, smooth as a blade drawn from a sheath. "The dead do haunt the woods after all." Severin stepped forward, placing his body between Ysmera and the open doorway. The fire snapped and flared, as if reacting to him. Edrian's smile widened. And you, he continued, looking past Severin to Ysmera with the casual ownership of a man reading a contract. You should come back, your mind to retrieve. Ysmera's stomach turned, not wife, not mate, retrieve like property lost in snow. She forced her voice out despite shaking. You refused me. I refused the public burden. Adrian's gaze dropped briefly to the brand on her collarbone and lingered there with a cruel little glint. But you are still useful, more useful than you understand. Severin's low growl filled the cabin, vibrating through the floorboards. It wasn't the sound of a man debating. It was the sound of a wolf deciding. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Careful, Severin knocked her in. If you're truly alive, then you're a problem the council will pay handsomely to erase again. Don't add an outlawed Omega to your sins. Severin's voice came out like winter stone. Leave. Adrian chuckled, as if indulging a child. Then he lifted a hand, and shapes moved in the storm behind him, men in pack cloaks, their eyes glinting, their scents layered with discipline and blood. Trackers, hunters, alphas and betas who didn't mind getting their hands dirty if the law called it duty. Ysmera's knees threatened to fold. The cabin suddenly felt too small, the walls too thin, the fire too fragile against what stood outside. Adrian's gaze locked on her again. Come quietly, Ysmera. I can make the mark less painful. I can give you shelter, a place. You know what happens to Forsworn in the wild. He took one step into the cabin. Severin moved to meet him, and the air between them tightened like a drawn bowstring. Ysmera stood behind Severin's shoulder, shaking, the salve jar still in her hand like a ridiculous weapon, and realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that the winter forest was no longer the thing most likely to kill her. The war had found her. And it had brought two alphas with it, one wearing law like a crown, and one wearing scars like truth. The first man through the broken door carried a hooked spear meant for wolves, the metal barbs glistening with oil so blood would slick it faster. Snow clung to his lashes. His eyes flicked past the hearth, took in the furs, the herbs, the lone bed, the Omega standing barefoot with a blanket clenched around her like armor. Adrian stepped in after him as if he owned the air. Severin didn't retreat. He simply shifted, shoulders rolling forward, making himself the only path to Ysmera. The tracker raised the spear. Severin moved. It happened too quickly for thought to keep up, too clean for the room to understand it had become a battlefield. Severin caught the spear shaft with one hand, yanked it sideways, and drove his elbow into the tracker's throat with a dull crack that made Ysmera's stomach twist. The man fell back, gagging, boots skidding on snow melt. Adrian's smile didn't even falter. You still fight like an heir. Severin's gaze stayed flat and murderous. You still hide behind others. Outside, more silhouettes gathered. Their scents pressed into the cabin, pack discipline, leather, steel, and the sharp, eager edge of men who believed law could make any cruelty righteous. Ysmera's hands shook so hard the salve jar rattled against her palm. She forced herself not to look at the open doorway, because the storm beyond it felt like another enemy waiting for her to blink. Adrian took another slow step, boots crunching over splinters. Come here, Ysmera. This doesn't need to be ugly. Severin's lips curled just enough to show teeth. You brought spears. Adrian's eyes flicked to the brand on her collarbone. She brought shame. The words slammed into her with the familiarity of abuse dressed as virtue. A memory flashed, Adrian's hand on her waist during betrothal dances, his mouth close to her ear, murmuring that her sweetness would quiet their rivals, that her body would be the bridge between packs. A bridge could be burned. Ysmera drew a ragged breath and tasted smoke. Her collarbone throbbed beneath the mark, the pain suddenly sharper, as if the broken circle had heard Adrian's voice and answered with heat. One of the men outside barked something, an order, quick and clipped. The group shifted, trying to angle into the cabin in a half-circle, to pin Severin against the hearth and reach her. Severin's hand flicked to the knife rack. Metal sang as it left wood. "Ysmera," he said without looking back, and hearing her name in his rough voice did something strange to her chest, something perilously close to relief. "Behind me. When I move, you run to the back wall. There's a trapdoor under the fur by the herb shelf." "How?" her voice scraped. "How do you expect me to?" His eyes cut to her, a single glance that held no impatience, only command forged by survival. "Do it." Adrian heard every word. He lifted his chin slightly, amusement warming his gaze. How domestic, the ghost alpha with his little den. Severin's knife flashed. The blade didn't fly at Adrian's heart. It buried itself in the doorframe, right beside Adrian's head, so close Ysmera saw a strand of Adrian's hair lift with the impact. Silence hit like a slap. Adrian's eyes narrowed, the first true spark of anger breaking his polished mask. "Careful." Severin's voice stayed low. "You're not worth wasting a clean kill." A tracker surged forward, furious on Adrian's behalf. Severin met him with the economy of a storm. A step, a twist, a brutal strike to the man's wrist. The spear clattered. Severin drove his shoulder into the tracker's chest and slammed him into the hearthstones. The fire flared and spat sparks. Ysmera flinched, then forced herself to move. Her legs screamed, pins and needles agony from thawing and fear, but she made herself cross the cabin, one breath at a time, clutching the blanket tight enough to cut her palms. A hand grabbed her arm from behind. She screamed before she could stop it, the sound ragged, humiliating. The grip tightened. "Hold her," Ysmera twisted. A beta, young, frightened, obedient, had slipped in low while Severin engaged the others. His eyes were wide as if he hadn't expected a real woman to be attached to the prize. "Let go," she rasped. His gaze darted to Adrian, seeking approval. Adrian's voice came smooth from near the threshold. "Be gentle. We only need her alive." Only need her alive. Something inside Ysmera snapped tight, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Her collarbone burned. Heat surged under the brand, racing up her throat, behind her eyes, down her sternum. The Forsworn mark wasn't a wound anymore. It was a mouth opening. The beta yelped and released her as if he'd grabbed hot iron. His palms smoked faintly, a pale shimmer rolling over his skin. Ysmera staggered back, staring at her own body in horror. Moonlight bled through the cabin's shutter cracks, thin and silver. It fell across her collarbone, and the broken circle seemed to drink it. Severin turned at the sound, eyes widening a fraction, shock, then recognition so sharp it looked like pain. Adrian saw it too. His pupils blew wide with greedy understanding. "There you are." The air thickened, charged with something ancient and cold. Ysmera's knees threatened to give out. She pressed her hand over the brand as if she could smother the glow. The mark flared anyway. For a heartbeat, it wasn't the Forsworn sigil at all. Broken circle filled in, the barbed line melting into a crescent that cradled it. An emblem she had seen only once, carved above a ruined gate on the far ridge, where elders said children shouldn't play. The Nocturne crescent, the royal moon oath. Adrian inhaled sharply, almost a shiver of pleasure. The healers were right to suspect. Your blood is the key. Ysmera's throat closed. "What are you talking about?" Adrian's gaze pinned her like a nail. "A moon-blooded Omega can bind an alpha to the royal line. Not with affection, not with choice, with law written into marrow. The council has been searching for you for years, Ysmera Sableheart. You were never a bride, you were a lock." Severin's face went utterly still. "You branded her to break her, to hide her." Adrian's smile returned, colder now. "Forsworn don't get examined. Forsworn don't get sheltered. Forsworn die quietly, and the council doesn't have to explain why they needed her in the first place. The cabin seemed to shrink around Ysmera's ribs. Every memory rearranged itself, twisting into new shapes. The healer's evasive gaze, the rushed confirmation of her barrenness. Edrian's sudden, public cruelty timed perfectly to law. She wasn't discarded because she was useless. She was discarded because she was valuable. Severin moved with a sound like a growl dragged through human throat. He advanced on Edrian, knife in hand, murder carved into every line of him. Edrian lifted his hand. The trackers tensed, ready to die for their alpha's command. "Stop," Edrian said, voice sharpened with authority meant to compel. By council decree, Severin didn't stop. He lunged. Edrian's men surged forward to intercept. Steel met flesh in flashes, Severin's knife opening a forearm, a spear scraping his shoulder, a boot slamming his ribs. He fought through them like something that had forgotten what surrender meant. Ysmera stumbled backward toward the herb shelf, fingers scrabbling for the edge of the fur Severin had mentioned. A tracker grabbed her hair. Pain exploded across her scalp. She choked on a cry. The man yanked her head back, exposing her throat. His scent hit her fear masked with duty. "Got her." Severin's head snapped toward them. For one instant, his attention split. Edrian took that instant and drove a short blade into Severin's side. Blood darkened Severin's shirt immediately. He didn't fall. He didn't even gasp. He simply turned, and the look he gave Edrian was the look of a wolf that had decided you no longer belonged in the world. Ysmera's mark pulsed again, responding to blood in the room like a drumbeat. The tracker holding her hissed, Don't do that," as the heat from her collarbone spread, crawling along her skin like living silver. She jerked violently, twisting out of his grip. The blanket slipped. Cold air bit her thighs. She didn't care. Her fingers found the edge of the fur rug and ripped it back. Wood beneath. A seam, a trapdoor. She yanked it up, splinters scraping her palms, and a gust of earth-cold air rose like breath from a grave. A narrow ladder led down. Severin's voice cut through the chaos. Now, Ysmera didn't hesitate again. She swung her legs over and dropped, hands clumsy on rungs. Pain shot through her toes, her ankles, her calves. She bit back a scream and kept descending. Above, the cabin shook with impacts and snarled commands. She heard Edrian's voice, tightened with fury. "Do not let her." The trapdoor slammed shut. Darkness swallowed her whole. For 3 panicked heartbeats, she hung on the ladder, blind and shaking, listening to muffled violence above as if it were happening in another life. Then a soft, unmistakable sound came from the tunnel ahead. A low, steady exhale. Someone else was down here. Ysmera froze, breath trapped behind her teeth. "Severin." Silence. The exhale came again, too controlled, too calm. Her mark warmed, not flaring, but guiding, like a hand pressing between her shoulder blades. Ysmera's fingers slid down the ladder. Her feet found packed earth. She stood in the dark, arms wrapped around herself, and forced her eyes to adjust. A faint blue glow pulsed ahead, like moonlight trapped in ice. She followed it, one step at a time. The tunnel opened into a small chamber lined with stones set in a spiral. Old sigils were carved into them, worn by time, but the shapes were familiar now, as if her blood recognized the language before her mind did. In the center lay a shallow basin, empty of water, filled instead with a thin sheen of frost. Above it, a crack in the earth let a thread of moonlight fall straight down, even through storm, even through roof and wood, as if the moon had memorized this place. And there, leaning against the stone wall, sat a woman. An elder, her hair a white braid thick as rope, her skin lined like bark. Her eyes were pale and clear. Ysmera's breath caught. She knew those eyes, not personally. From the front row of ceremonies, from council gatherings, from the way people lowered their gaze when she passed, Matriarch Calistrine, the Nocturne seer who had vanished after Severin's death. Ysmera backed up instinctively, bumping the ladder. "You're alive," Calistrine said softly, her voice roughened by age and secrecy. "As he is." "As you are, little moon thread." Ysmera's throat worked. "What is this place?" "A root." Calistrine's gaze flicked to Ysmera's collarbone. "A place where oaths were made before councils wrote laws on parchment, before alphas pretended they ruled without the moon." Above them, a heavy crash shook dust from the ceiling. Calistrine didn't flinch. "They found the cabin. Of course they did." Ysmera's voice trembled. "Severin, he's fighting them. Because he believes he can take wounds for you and still outrun fate." Calistrine's mouth tightened with something like grief. "He is wrong unless you stop being only prey." Ysmera swallowed, tasting smoke and fear. "I don't know how. You do." Calistrine nodded toward the basin. "Your mark is not only shame, it is an attempted severing. They burned you to break the path your blood carries. They failed." Ysmera stared at the stone basin as if it might bite. "I'm not. Edrian said I'm moon-blooded. That can't be true." Calistrine's expression softened by a fraction. "They told you you were barren because it was a clean cruelty. A story the pack would accept. Omegas who cannot carry are easy to discard." The words hit Ysmera's ribs like fists. "So it was a lie." "A lie," Calistrine agreed, and her gaze sharpened, going flint-hard. "And a drug. Bitter root and blackthorn extract, given in fertility tonics to make your heat irregular, your womb quiet, your body easier to control. They needed you desperate enough to cling to any shelter and ashamed enough not to seek other healers." Ysmera's knees nearly folded. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, stunned by the idea that even her own cycle had been managed like a leash. A sound tore from her throat, half laugh, half sob. "I trusted them." "I know." Calistrine's voice was gentle now, a rare softness. "Trust is how they tame us." Above, a sharp shout, pain, male, angry, muffled by earth. Ysmera's breath hitched. "We have to help him." "We will," Calistrine said, "but not with claws alone." She pushed herself to her feet with a small wince, favoring one leg. Age and stubbornness held her upright. "Come," she gestured to the basin. "Put your hand in the frost." Ysmera hesitated. "Why?" "Because the moon does not answer blood that refuses itself." Calistrine's eyes pinned her, startlingly fierce for such an old face. "You want protection, little Omega, then become something worth fearing." The words should have offended. They didn't. They landed in Ysmera's chest like a match dropped into dry tinder. She stepped forward and knelt at the basin. The frost shimmered, responding to her heat. Her mark pulsed in time with her heart. Ysmera lowered her hand. Cold bit her skin at once, not painful, but penetrating, sliding under her fingernails into her veins until she felt it in her teeth. The basin's frost surged up her wrist like silver vines. Ysmera gasped and tried to pull back, but Calistrine's hand closed over her forearm, surprisingly strong. "Stay," Calistrine murmured. "Let it see you." The frost climbed higher, wrapping her arm. It didn't numb. It awakened. Images slammed into Ysmera's mind. A woman kneeling under a full moon, her throat bared, an alpha above her, not taking, not claiming, but offering his wrist. Blood dripping into a stone basin, the moon's light descending like a blade of pure silver, an oath sealing around them like a ring of fire. A bond not of possession, but of protection and duty. An Omega's choice honored as law. Ysmera's breath came in harsh pulls. I can't." "Yes, you can," Calistrine whispered. "Because you are not a vessel. You are the one who decides what is born." The frost reached Ysmera's collarbone. The Forsworn brand flared. Agony lanced through her, sharp and white, but it didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like tearing stitches out of a wound that had been sewn wrong. The broken circle on her skin burned and then shifted. Lines softened. The barbs melted into a crescent. The mark became something new, clean, and bright, like a moon caught under skin. A countermark, an answered oath. Ysmera cried out, and her voice echoed through the chamber like a bell. Above them, the violence paused for a split second, as if every living thing had felt the shift in the air. Calistrine released her arm. The frost receded back into the basin, leaving Ysmera's skin tingling and warm, her collarbone marked now not with exile, but with a crescented circle, the moon oath. She stared at it, disbelieving. "What did I do?" "You returned your name to yourself," Calistrine said. "Now you can take it from them." Another crash above. A strangled grunt. Ysmera surged to her feet. "How do I help Severin?" Calistrine pointed to the tunnel's far end, where darkness narrowed. "That passage rises behind the cabin into the trees. You will go. You will not run away. You will go to him." Ysmera's pulse hammered. "I don't know how to fight." "You don't need to fight like an alpha." Calistrine's pale eyes glittered. "You need to command what they fear." Calistrine reached into her cloak and drew out a small vial dark glass, sealed with wax. She pressed it into Ysmera's palm. "What is it?" Ysmera asked. "Truth," Calistrine said simply. "Your blood, taken when you were a babe. I kept it hidden because the council would have drained you for it. Now it will burn the lies off their tongues." Ysmera's hand closed around the vial. It felt warm, impossibly, as if it pulsed with a small heartbeat of its own. "Go," Calistrine said. Ysmera didn't waste breath on more questions. She turned and ran into the tunnel, barefoot on packed earth, blanket abandoned. Fear sharpened into something else, purpose. As she ran, she realized the tremble in her limbs wasn't only weakness anymore. It was power trying to find a shape. She burst out of a hidden hatch behind the cabin into a wall of snow and noise. The storm had thickened, but the yard around the cabin was churned into mud and slush by boots. Torches hissed, their flames fighting the wind. Men shouted, grappling, circling. Severin stood near the doorway, half-turned, blood soaking his side. A spear had grazed his shoulder. His breath steamed in harsh bursts. Even wounded, he looked like the center of the world's violence, the place every motion pointed toward. Edrian stood a few paces away, cloak flaring, a short blade in his hand. He looked frustrated now, his men wary, because Severin hadn't gone down the way a dead heir was supposed to. Ysmera's new mark thrummed beneath her skin as if it recognized both alphas and refused to kneel. She stepped into view. "Ysmera," Edrian's voice snapped, triumphant. "Good, you've saved us the trouble." Several trackers pivoted toward her. Severin's head turned sharply. His eyes found her, and for a heartbeat, something almost like panic crossed his face. "Get back." "No," Ysmera said, and her voice surprised her with its steadiness. It carried, clear even in wind. "I'm done moving where you push me." Edrian's gaze dropped to her collarbone. The moon oath mark glowed faintly, silver under skin. His expression changed. The triumph soured into something like alarm, quickly masked. Severin stared too, and in his eyes the recognition deepened into something dangerously tender, hope he didn't know how to hold. Edrian recovered first, smiling as if he could still charm law into obedience. "That mark doesn't belong on you. Come here and I'll have it corrected." "Corrected," Ysmera repeated, tasting the word. "Like you corrected my life." Edrian's smile tightened. "You don't understand what you are." "I understand what you did." Her fingers closed around the vial Calistrine had given her. "You called me barren, you called me useless, you burned me to hide me. That was never about law, that was about control." A murmur rippled through the trackers. Some shifted uneasily. Men followed orders, but they also feared curses, and fear was older than councils. Adrian's eyes flashed. Silence. None of you are paid to think. Ysmera lifted the vial. Then listen. This is my blood, moon blood. The council wanted it. You wanted it. You didn't want me as a wife. You wanted me as a leash for the royal line. Adrian's jaw flexed. Give it to me. No. The refusal came out simple, final. The word of a woman who had learned she could end a sentence without permission. Adrian took one step closer, blade angled low. You will, or I will take it, and you will beg me for the kind of mercy you refuse to accept in the chapel. Severin moved, a protective shift, but his footing slipped in slush and pain made his breath hitch. Adrian saw the weakness and smiled again, crueler. Look at him, Ysmera. This is what you get when you attach yourself to ghosts. He cannot save you. Ysmera's heart clenched, not with doubt but with fury at the way Adrian used truth like a weapon. Severin was bleeding. He was still standing. He had saved her once already, with no promise of reward. And you? Ysmera asked, voice shaking now, but with anger, not fear. You couldn't even look at me when they burned me. Adrian's eyes hardened. I did what was required. The snow swirled around them, bright in torchlight like ash. Ysmera raised her chin. Then hear what is required of me. She uncorked the vial. The scent hit the air instantly, cold silver, night-blooming flowers, and something that made every alpha on the clearing's edge stiffen. It wasn't perfume. It was lineage, ancient and undeniable. Even Adrian's eyes widened slightly, his control slipping under instinct. Ysmera tilted the vial and let a single drop fall onto her palm. It didn't bead like normal blood. It shimmered, reflecting moonlight that wasn't there, forming a tiny crescent before sinking into her skin. Pain flared, brief, sharp, and then the clearing changed. Not in appearance, in feeling.